Hey everybody, good morning. Thanks for joining with me for this Truth for the Moment podcast. I hope you're having a great start to your week and praying that you have a great rest of this week until we see you again this coming Sunday. For those who were able to join us this past Sunday at the community service, I think that went well. Thanks for being a part of that. If you had something else going on, I totally understand. For the dads, happy Father's Day. I hope that was a great day for you. We had a great day at our house. But anyways, all that aside, let's continue along today with our story here in the book of Daniel. Today we're coming to Daniel chapter 6, which is the final narrative chapter here in the book of Daniel. What we find is that 5 of the 6 first chapters in the book are a story, and then chapter 2 and then chapters 7 to the end in chapter 12 are all much more prophetic in nature. So the book is really split up half and half. And today we're coming to this great chapter that details for us another example of Daniel not falling to compromise in a pagan culture. It fits so well and is so relevant for you and I today when we consider the world in which we live. For us as Christians, every day there are more and more opportunities in which we can justify, compromise, choose comfort over conviction in the realm of the culture in which we live. And so Daniel is a supreme example for us in these narrative stories of how to be different, how to live boldly, how to stand out amidst the crowd for the sake of the glory of God. And so today as we come to chapter 6, there's a new king who's on the throne. It's no longer Nebuchadnezzar. It's no longer his grandson Belshazzar. Instead, who we have on the throne is somebody that belongs to an entirely different kingdom. We learned at the end of chapter 5 that the Medo-Persian Empire had swept in over Babylon. It had taken control. There was a new king who was set in order, and his name was Darius the Mede. He's now here at the beginning of his rule, really at the beginning of chapter 6. Now remember too that Daniel was likely just a teenager in 605 BC when he came into Babylon as an exile. He was brought there, chosen because of his skill, his knowledge, his wisdom, and then they trained him for 3 years. Yeah, we don't need to get into all those details again. But let's just say he was 19 at the time. We'll understand that since then, now in chapter 6, 67 more years have passed. And now Daniel as an empire under a new rulership, and it's likely that he's about 86 years old. Well, as you get into this chapter and there's a new kingdom, we find that Daniel yet again gets himself a position of promotion. He is one of the 3 high officials who's chosen to be an overseer of the kingdom. And then even of those 3, we find in verse 3 that he becomes distinguished above all the other high officials because it says he has an excellent spirit within him. This again is a challenge for us. Let's be the best people we can be. Let's live our lives with excellence in whatever God gives us to do, because we do want to stand out, even in our skill, in our gifts, in the way we love, and especially in our integrity of character. So Daniel did that, and it's a call for us to do the same. Well, we find in verse 4 that even though he has this promotion, Daniel, because of the promotion, has a problem. I remember back when I used to work at Starbucks that there were a few others that were really good at their job. Honestly, they had way more passion to work at Starbucks than I did. They wanted to be managers. They wanted to be general managers. And so they really went above and beyond the call of a normal shift to be able to be seen and acknowledged by the boss. However, there were others that didn't like their desire to do this, and so they maligned them, they misspoke of them, they misrepresented them. And as a result, the boss often did not choose these people because their character had been attacked by others. Well, Daniel here is facing a similar struggle. We find that in verse 4, that there are these high officials who sought to find a ground for complaint against Daniel in regard to his position of authority. However, it says they could find no ground for complaint or any fault, right? He had a flawless character. There was no issue of integrity or lack of it in his life because he was faithful, it says, and no error or fault was found in him. And so these men decided, okay, if we can't attack his character, what we need to do is attack his convictions. Oh, they could do that. They knew who Daniel worshiped. Daniel was a worshiper of the one God, Yahweh. And they knew the stories before of how he had been faithful to his God in various capacities. Now, God was faithful then to him. Well, clearly Daniel was a sore thumb sticking out in the way of these other leaders. And so they made a plan. They decided to go into King Darius and wanting to have him put together a new decree that anyone who worshiped any other god or who prayed with petition to any other god or man besides the king alone was to be thrown into the lion's den. And so they appealed to the trust of the king because they said that all the high officials, including Daniel even, had gathered together and agreed to this royal statute. And so the king thought that was great. They also played to the king's vanity, his proud, arrogant heart. Of course, they wanted it to sound that this was promoting his own worship, his own name. Well, verse 10 tells us that Daniel knew that this document was then signed by the king. Well, how would you react if that was you in that situation and you knew that if you continued to publicly worship Yahweh, God himself, King of Kings, in any way, you would be killed? You'd be thrown into a pit of lions. Would you choose to take a vacation from your faith? Would you justify keeping your prayer life hidden for a month in order to live? It kind of sounds like an easy, simple thing to do. But understand that Daniel was never private about his faith. He refused to put safety over boldness. He never put comfort over conviction. Verse 10 goes on to say that he got down on his knees still 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God as he had done previously. Well, this is just an amazing act. And really what Daniel's doing here is reflecting back what King Solomon had told or was told by God himself in 2 Chronicles chapter 6, verses 36 through 39. Here it says this, and Daniel's following this. It says, when they sin against you and you become angry with them. This is speaking of those who bring into exile the people of Israel for their sin. And you become angry with them and deliver them to the enemy and take them captive to a land far or near. Yet when they come to themselves in the land where they are carried captive and repent and make supplication to you in the land of their captivity, saying, we have sinned, we have done wrong, and have committed wickedness. And when they return to you with all their heart and with all their soul in the land of their captivity, where they have been carried captive, and pray toward their land which you gave to their fathers. That's what Daniel's doing here. He's going out publicly and praying towards the land of his fathers, the city in which you have chosen, and toward the temple which I have built for your name. Then hear from heaven, your dwelling place, their prayer and their supplications, and maintain their cause, and forgive your people who have sinned against you. So here Daniel is doing just that. And here we see that God is wanting to bless and bring favor to any exile who repents and chooses to continue publicly praying toward Jerusalem for their deliverance. Well, this is what Daniel is doing in this particular time. And keep in mind that there's nothing special about who Daniel is by nature. There's nothing about his connection or relation to God that makes him a super Christian, you could say. Even Paul had his issue with those who were known as super apostles in the New Testament times. Think about what it says in James chapter 5, verses 17 and 18. There it's talking about Elijah, we know, who prayed that it would not rain, and then he prayed that it would rain, and so on, and God answered his prayers. Well, it says that when he did that, it says that he was a man with a nature just like ours, yet he prayed and God worked. Remember, too, that Jesus said that the faith that you have, the size of a mustard seed, is all that you need to move the mountains. What he's making a point of is that it's your faith in the object of your faith that matters. And it's not even about the amount of faith you have. It's much more not about your privilege, but about your simple trust in the God of heaven and earth to move on your behalf. And that's encouraging for us, isn't it? Well, when the officials saw Daniel praying, wow, they immediately went to the king and they got Daniel in trouble. We see that in verse 12. And this situation, this rule that the king had made, kind of got wrapped up in his mind, and he realized the mistake he had made, and it displeased the king. He tried, it says, to get Daniel out of it, but he could find no way to weave or to maneuver around his edict, his decree. So the plan went forward. But notice Darius's words to Daniel in verse 16. It says there that the king declared to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve continually, deliver you." Now, this is just as Daniel's about to be thrown into the lion's den. Now, understand, it's probably not a den. It's probably a pit. It's a large hole in the ground at the bottom of which there are several ferocious, very hungry lions. And think about the fact that this prayer almost that King Darius just prayed is much like a petition to a God besides himself. It's as if he's breaking his own decree that he had said himself. Well, what's so amazing here is the way that God worked. We see here that throughout the night, the king was fasting. He likely was praying. And then the very next morning, he rushed with haste over to the den of the lions. And as he came near to the den where Daniel was, he cried out in a tone of anguish. And the king declared to Daniel, "O Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions?" And Daniel said to the king, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they have not harmed me, because I was found blameless before him. And also before you, O king, I have done no harm." And as a result, the king was exceedingly glad. He realized through all of this that these other high-ranking officials were plotting against Daniel, wanting to demise him, wanting to take him out. And so he was on to their ways. And as a result, he flipped the tables back on them. And he then commanded that those who maliciously accused Daniel were now the ones who would be cast into the den of lions themselves. And not just them, but their children, their families, their wives. They all were thrown into the den of lions, and it says that before they even reached the bottom, the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones in pieces. And then as a result, we find that King Darius has a new decree that he sets out for the entire empire, which says that people are to tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. And he says in verse 26 and 27, "For he is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall be to the end. He delivers and rescues. He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. He who has saved Daniel from the power of the lions." And it ends by saying in verse 28, "So this Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian after." Isn't that amazing how God worked through this situation, this predicament, this problem that Daniel faced? God answered the prayer from 2 Chronicles, and we see that now God is answering the prayer of the king himself, and God is answering the simple prayer of Daniel. Daniel has an amazing example here of continued confidence and trust in God despite whatever is happening in his life. He has total peace and relaxation even in knowing that God is reigning upon his throne. We see that God delivers and he rescues. Humans cannot ultimately deliver themselves. Only God does that. We see that God works signs and wonders. Today we believe in science and reason in our culture, and we've lost the gravitas of the fact God is a God of miracles and signs and wonders, and he wants to do even great things through the lives of his people. And right, every time somebody comes to faith in Jesus, that is a miracle taking place in the heart of a person. And lastly, God is eternal. He has an eternal kingdom. There is no earthly kingdom that can ever compete with his. Earthly kingdoms come and go, but God's kingdom reigns forever in the heavens. And it says in Psalms that he does whatever he pleases. Friends, this is the kind of God that we serve, a faithful God who is faithfully committed to his people. He was committed to the Jews in the Old Testament. He's still committed to them today. And also because we're grafted into them, he is just as committed to us today in the church as believers. So believe that. Choose the hard road of hard obedience to the Lord in the midst of whatever cultural situation you find yourself. Choose God's way over the world's way and don't compromise in the slightest. And I believe that you will see and experience the deliverance of God in your own life when you do just that. So blessing is on you as you go from here. Next week, we'll enter into the prophetic section of Daniel in chapter 7. Looking forward to that. It's amazing what God shows Daniel in weeks ahead. So anyways, have a great week. I'll see you on Sunday.